Oh, it's a nice rainy day. Hey, everybody. Everybody's dry. All right. Okay, ready? Wow, the majority of people don't have their cameras on. Come on, Chavir, what's going on? Come on. That's like we like this. Okay, hi everybody. Nice to see you. Come on. What's going on? Come on. You want to be
Hi.
treated. You want to be treated like you're in the room, so you have to put on your camera. Kacha said. Right.
Still in my bathrobe.
Well, okay, so it's not that's not my responsibility. Get dressed for shul.
I'm in Chicago. It's an hour earlier.
I'm coming in my bathrobe next week also. Okay.
You
so,
should, by all means.
Well, it's Purim, for goodness sakes, Keith. Purim.
This is my costume. This is my costume.
All right, anybody else wearing a costume? Let's see it. Let's see who's got the costumes on.
No costume, but good to see you, Rabbi.
Good to see you guys.
Judy Young in Columbia, Maryland.
All
Checking
right.
in.
Oh, nice.
Great to see you.
Right. We have a couple of folks here. We're on the rainy side today.
Yeah.
What is that?
I'm wearing a chocolate mousse costume.
Chocolate mousse?
See, yeah, the mousse is made out of chocolate.
Oh my God.
All right. I'm wearing the sky. I was trying my attempt to be the sky. That was okay.
Morning.
Morning, Paul. Just discussing costume. What are you dressed as today?
It's unclear. Just as it should be.
As it should
But
be.
it will be clear at one.
You say I'm a rain puddle. Okay, yalla. Let's learn Torah. We're gonna have the blessings of Torah on the screen. Good morning. All right, we're just about to make brachot. Right?
How you feeling?
Thanks, Catherine.
Oh.
Okay.
Caroline, but thank you.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעשות בדברי תורה. Someone was about to say something. Hello? Okay, let's learn. So I'll share the screen, Catherine.
Caroline, yes.
I'm Caroline. Thank you. If I confuse anybody else's names today, please let me know. Don't be bashful.
What?
Why can't I?
There are people there in person, not that many yet. Crappy day. I think it's a rainy day, I guess.
Just so everybody knows, you guys are not muted. So whoever's talking right now about how crappy a day it is, we hear you. So it is a crappy day, and no doubt about it. But it's rating. All right. It's like I forgot how stressful it is to teach. So, all right, guys. How do I get this into a good? There's only a full screen option here.
Yeah.
All right, today is the day before Purim, which of course in Shabbos, the Shabbos before Purim is a special Shabbat called Shabbat Zachor, named for the part of the Torah that we're going to read. The extra reading and it's one of the four Shabbatot that precede um, uh, Pesach, right? So last week was 2 weeks ago was Shkalim, and then this week is Zachor, and Achodesh, and then Shabbos Hagadol. Okay, so here we go. What happened? What is the story? Source 1. People see me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Vayavo Amalek. Vayilachem im Yisrael beRefidim. And Amalek came and fought with Israel in Refidim. Vayomer Moshe Yoshua v'chalanu anashim etzei hilachem b'Amalek. Moses says to Joshua, choose for you men and say, go out and hilachem b'Amalek and fight with Amalek. Machar, tomorrow. Anuchi nitzav, I will be standing al rosh hagivah at the top of the hill. Umatei Elohim biyadi, and I'll have the God's rod, God rod, rod of God in my hand. Vayas Yoshua kasher amar Moshe lehilachem b'Amalek. And Yoshua did as Moshe had told him to fight with Amalek. Moshe, Aaron, the Chur, Alub Rosh Hagivah, and then Moses, Aaron, and Chur, they went up to the mountaintop, to the hilltop. And Vayak Asher Yarim Moshe Yado, and when Moses would raise up his hand, the Gavar Israel and Israel would be victorious, they would prevail, they would be strong, they would be strengthened. Asher Yaniach Yadav, or Yado Gavar Amalek. But when his hands were down, Amalek would prevail. So let's ratchet up the tension. We did Moshe Kvedim, but Moshe couldn't keep his hands up the whole time. They were heavy. By the way, it's also his lips were heavy. So it's an interesting thing with Moshe's body parts that become heavy for him. Right? But Moshe is Aral Svatayim. He also has heavy lips. Ish. So he's Kaved. So his hands are Kaved, or heavy. Vaikhu Even. So they took a rock by Yasimu Tachtav, Vayeshev Alea, and they put a rock beneath his tuchas, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur tamchui biyadav, and then Aaron and Hur. Rachel's laughing. Rachel, your laughter is infectious, but everybody. Maybe we should mute everybody, and then we'll call on people who want to speak. Okay. But Yidei Moshe, they would tamchu biyadav. They would hold up his hands. Mizeh echad, mizeh echad. This one from this side, this one from another side. And his hands were strengthened. Literally, they were like amun, mean they were steady until the sun rose, until the sunset, right? Until sun rising. It's Bo Hashem, which literally means until the sun came, but here it means until the sun left. And in your Joshua, and Joshua, I guess he overwhelmed them, Amalek and his people, with the sword. Akoda, Vayomer Adonai Moshe. God said to Moses in verse 14, Kitov zot zikaron b'sefer, write this as a remembrance and a reminder, and read it aloud. Put it into the ears of Joshua, v'sim be'oznei Yoshua, ki macho emcha et zech Amalek mitach l'shamayim, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Vayiven Moshe mizbeach, and Moses built an altar. Vayikra Shmo Adonai Nisi, and he called the altar Adonai is my banner. My God is my miracle, or God is my banner. Adonai Nisi. In verse 16, which closes this piece, Vayomer, and he said, Ki yad al kesya milchama ladonai ba'amalek midor dor. The hand upon the throne. Not really clear what this means. For there is a hand upon God's throne. There is a hand upon God's throne. There is a war between God and Amalek in every generation. Okay, that's the first appearance of Amalek, and it sets the
God and Amalek,
between God and Amalek.
Oh.
Right, Milchama. God has a war with Amalek in every generation. Okay. Just beginning our journey here. This is like this is you know as well as I do that these are the primary sources, but what happens with those sources is quite right. That's the journey of learning Torah together. So, just a quick moment into the end of the Torah, Deuteronomy, so it's in the fifth book of the Torah. If you look at source number 2, these are the two primary sources for Parshat Zachor. So it's okay. See it, everybody online? Yeah. Source number 2. Zachor asher asavach Amalek. Right? This remember, don't forget. There's a paradox of the Torah commands Israel both to remember what Amalek did and also blot them out all at the same time. Remember to blot them out. Remember them to blot them out. Okay. So Zachor, see verse 17, chapter 25, verse 17. Zachor et asher asalach Amalek b'derech b'tzeitchem mitzrayim. These are one of the 6 zichirot that are daily remembrances that very extremely traditional Jews and very punctilious Jews. These are 6 mitzvot that are called mitzvot timidiyot. They're constant reminders, and they become almost a mantra. One of them, of course, is the well of Miriam is to be remembered every single day, and so on. So this is one of them, right? Zachor d'asher asalach Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you when you were leaving Egypt. Asher korcha b'derech. This is a great phrase. Korcha b'derech. The word koracha is in English as surprised you on the march. The word koracha is from the word mikra, which means like it happened upon you. Interesting, just happened upon you just is the opposite. It kind of means like they just happened upon you. You know, I was down at the Nova Festival, right? In Israel, in the south of Israel, and it's now known that the murderers they entered Israel, but they weren't planning. It wasn't. It doesn't seem from their plans that they were planning to go. They didn't know about the Nova Festival. They just happened upon this.
Wow.
These innocent people, and it's Asher Korcha here means like they happened upon you, but it's interesting. They surprised you is also a way of saying it. It's interesting, like the difference here. But either way, one seems to be premeditated, and one doesn't. But the tradition understands this as a premeditated attack by Amalek, and and they it's a strange phrase. They tailed you. Zanat means that they hit the tail. The word zanat, vayizanev, the verb. They tailed you, and by attacking those who are in the rear, those who are nechat shalim, they're like weak ones, famished and weary. They're acharecha, they were in the back. All of you were tired and exhausted, and you were not yet fearing God, right? Really, it's not clear who is not Yarei Elohim. It seems that they weren't. Later tradition says that we weren't, right? That it was because we lacked fear in God that this allowed, it's kind of like punishing us. In any event, this is a description of the enemy. And when God will grant you safety or peace, when God will make sure that you are now at peace with all the enemies that surround you in the land that God will give you as an inheritance. It's uncanny the way that it sounds about relevant for now. Destroy, utterly destroy, or wipe out the remembrance of Amalek from underneath the heavens. Do not forget. Okay, very strong. Yeah, very strong. Now, of course, before we get to who Amalek is and who might it still be, it's like this is a clearly a traumatic moment for the Jewish people, right? It's a very intense moment. And again, I'm using examples. I'm not saying that the Arabs are Amalek. I'm not saying that. So just like I want to preface it by saying, but like it sounds like Yom Kippur War, right? It's like here we are relaxing, we're at peace, or Simchas Torah, right? We just got out of Egypt, we made our way through the Red Sea, departed, and we were out of nowhere we were attacked. Like, why did they attack us? Like what could possibly have motivated them? We'll get to that a little later. Like who, why did they attack us? So look at number 3. In terms of the Ralbag, the 14th century philosopher, Rav Levi ben Gershon, Gersonides, and he elaborates on what the attack was all about, the state of the Jews, and what the legacy of Amalek was in the Torah and in like what its legacy was, what they intended. What does it mean that they struck down those in your tail, the feeble ones? Shaharag azanav shebahem, vehem kol hachalushim shiu holchim bezanav hamachaneh v'chushatam. They killed their tail, meaning those are the weaker ones who had been walking at the tail of the camp due to their weakness. And that is why it explains that Amalek gathered all the causes with which they could complete the destruction of the Jewish people. The first is that they engaged in war with Israel on the way, when they were not on guard against it, before they could put on their war gear. They were like, we weren't ready. It's like amazing, right? And in this way, they killed all the weak ones who were at the end of the camp, as none of them remained. The second is that they found them weary and tired from the strain of the journey. The third is that individual providence had not yet, this is a very philosophical idea, that individual providence had not yet attached itself to the Jewish people, since the Jewish people did not yet fear God, as can be seen from the quarrel that they had just had there and tested God, as it is mentioned there. Meaning the Jewish people were not yet spiritually elevated sufficiently to warrant God's protection. That's his own theology. We're not going to go into that, but he's saying all of these parameters were present. And the fourth is from the general providence that Amalek would defeat Israel. Now, this is a wild thing. The Ralbag in the 14th century says that it was destined that Amalek were from what he calls general providence, means that from God's big macro plan, not individuals, but the macro plan, we were supposed to lose the war to Amalek. You ever hear that?
No,
It's crazy, right?
never.
It's really good. So listen to what he says. It's crazy. It's like, what? And with the joining of all these causes, such that they did not escape from their hands, so that they not destroy them, and that the curses that Esau was cursed on account of the blessing of Yaakov, not fall away from them and from the two sons of Esau. That is why God, may he be elevated, after they finish the wars of the 7 nations, he will give rest to Israel from all of their enemies around them. They shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek, in estimation of the evil they would try to do to the Jewish people in every generation when they have the ability. So, in other words, all of these forces came together. God was like, there are curses that Esau, like this theology of the Rabbah, there are curses that Esau was cursed on account of the blessing that Yaakov, right? When Jacob received the blessing, there are concomitant curses, not curses, but like that these are the blessings of Jacob, but Esau doesn't get them, as it were. So, and also, and that there should not be blessings. That there were blessings for the sons of Esau, right? So, in some way, the Ralbag is saying that there was an intervention here, even though it's supposed to happen that we were supposed to be blotted out by Amalek. We were supposed to be destroyed by Amalek. There's some kind of intervention. He says you can already see this in the days of the judges from Ziklag, the city of David, where this shows that they are always turning to do evil to the people when they have the ability. Likewise, Haman, the son of Hamadatta, and the Agagite, wanted to do to the Jewish people during the days of Mordechai and Esther. Were it not for God, he would have finished them off. Now, this is like, it's like from the perspective of this one particular thinker, this war with Amalek was a war, first of all, that is all of the features that were historically available were being capitalized upon by Amalek in this historical, like you understand this as a historical event. It took place. And Amalek was smart enough to use all of the things against the Jewish people that were available. They were weak, they just gone through a trauma, they were exhausted, right? They attacked the rear before the Israelites could put on their war gear. They weren't ready, right? But then he makes this claim, which is a pretty remarkable claim, that according to the general providence of the world, Amalek is kind of the exact equal to Israel, and they were supposed to defeat them. But God had second thoughts about it, and there's some kind of intervention that takes place. But let's look at the fourth source to see like the way that the rabbis imagined this intervention, and it's based on the verses that we read from the book of Exodus, where Moses is lifting up his hands, right? This is from a 3rd century text called the Mishnah. People know what the Mishnah is. The Jewish law, but Jewish legal compendium, and also all of these different laws that create Judaism that we practice today. But even though it's a legal text, it sometimes has elements that are folklorish and midrashic. And here's one case. Look at source 4. Go ahead. I see Jay, you have your hand up.
I was just sorry. Let me just the issue of why are we surprised that this is part of God's plan? Don't we have that in Joseph? The whole point that, well, I was thrown into the pit. Oh no, don't worry, that was God's plan, because that was supposed to happen. That way I could do what I then did later in the book. The idea that the stuff happens, it's part of God's plan. Even horrible things like the attack by Amalek.
Yeah, it's not. It's a strange plan. It's what was the general? I mean, I'm trying to understand this phrase. Hashgacha klalit ba'amalek lenatzach Yisrael utchaber kol ela zibot. Like it's a strange phrase. Like the general providence wanted Amalek to defeat Israel. What would be the purpose of that? Why would God want Israel to be defeated? I think he probably means that they had a purpose, as you said, right? Not that God. There's some purpose for Amalek, and I think that he's trying to say that Amalek serves to galvanize the Jewish people to have belief. Now, lest you think this is theologically abhorrent, I mean, it's a very problematic thing to say. It almost smacks of the kind of thing that you hear. Theologically insensitive things are not uncommon in Jewish philosophical writings, right? Or insensitive to our ears, but maybe making sense at one point. But like even today, you can hear statements like that. I heard statements like this in Israel that Hamas, right? Look, like one, we were in a hotel in Jerusalem on Shabbat last week, and in the hotel there was a large group of refugees from Kiryat Shmona, a northern Jewish town in Israel, who are living now and been living on. The government is paying for people to live in hotels because it's not safe for them up north. Also south, but so we were there and we were singing on Friday night, and a sweet Yid came over, a sweet guy. His name was Yaakov. Remember him?
Yes, I do.
And he came over and he heard me singing a song. I sing a song, and then he from Haggadah that became very popular in Israel. It was V'hi she'amda l'avoteinu v'lanu, right? It's a phrase from Haggadah. This is what stood for our people. That not just one rose up to destroy us, but in every generation they tried. So I'm singing this song, and he hears me, and he comes over and starts singing with me, right? And then he comes over and he says to me, "Look at this small thing that happened. One day, like this group came and he said something theologically very problematic. He said, look what they did to us. Look how united we are right now. Look how much belief we have right now in one another." And it was the kind of statement that you would never think proactively. You never think agentically that this is part of God's providence, actively. But you might say that it's a byproduct of something. People had a choice and it happened and they're to blame. But in response, look at our response to it, right? Which is theologically fine. It's like, yeah, this is how we responded, which is great. You never said that God brought people in order to unite us. That would be very problematic, right? So there is this strand, and I feel like that he's saying something like that here. But look at what happens in source number 4. And by the way, Jay, that might also be what Joseph was saying. Like he's saying something theologically very problematic. Like, don't worry, right? You don't have to worry. You didn't sin. God had a plan, right? But that can be a very offensive theology and extremely problematic. But again, it doesn't mean it's not true. It might be true. How would I know? One day we'll get to talk to God and say, God, Is this what you had in mind? But like, what a shitty, excuse me, like is that the best way? You couldn't think of, you're infinite. You couldn't think of like 100 other ways to get us to have belief. But okay. But look at the way the rabbis frame it in source number 4 in the Mishnah. The rabbis turn this essentially into an opportunity to remove the metaphysical implications of the biblical story. When Moses' hands were up, they won. When Moses' hands were down, they're losing. It's like, what does Moses' hands have to do with anything, right? So look at the way the Mishnah frames this. The Mishnah, I mean, by the way, for those who study Mishnah, and hopefully all of you will study Mishnah at some point, Mishnah is didactic legal phrases. They're very, very clear statements of law, and this rabbi says this rabbi says that, and they disagree. They don't get into stories and questions for the most part. 6 huge volumes on every area of human activity. And here in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, it asks the question, V'chiyadav shel Moshe osot milchama o shovrot, right? Milchama, are the hands of Moshe responsible for winning a war? You can already feel the rabbis in the 3rd century having a completely different understanding of metaphysics and theology. Like Moshe's hands, many of the people would say, what do you mean? That's the simple meaning of the text. Moshe's hands have everything to do with it. The real question is, what do Moshe's hands have to do with it? But for the rabbis in the Mishnah, they're already it's really a problem for them. Moshe's hands can't really win a war. What is Moshe? So they answer, Elo lamar lecha. We're on source 4. I have to move 1 second. Source 4, top of the page. But rather, Elo lamar lecha kozman sho yisam mistaklim ka b'mala u'mishabdin et libam lavim shebeshamayim. It teaches you that when the Jews looked towards heaven and inclined their hearts or subdued their hearts or gave their hearts over to God, right? They would win, and if not, they would fall. Similarly, Kayotze v'davar, in the book of Numbers in chapter 21, when there was a plague and a snake was placed onto the staff, right? Which becomes the medical symbol for us to see this here. So we have, it says that anybody that saw the snake would survive. And they ask the rabbis here theologically, it's very wild. Does a snake have the power of life and death? Ella, but rather, right? Right? Whenever they looked towards heaven, it became a means towards an end. It wasn't magic. It was a symbol. And this, of course, becomes the dominant theology of, the contra magic theology. All these things are pointing in the direction, very Maimonidean, very rational, right? So in the way that Ralbag says, Amalek is not this, ontological enemy. Amalek serves a purpose, which was to remind the Jewish people to look towards God at all times, especially when they're weak and they're feeling vulnerable. And that becomes like the purpose of Amalek, as it were, like to teach us to be faithful and to have faith. Now, you might be wondering who Amalek is at this moment. Or let's actually look at the extreme. Let's look at number 6, and then we'll come back to who Amalek is. Okay, I should have put number 6 and number 5, and why it seems that on a very simple level, why the Torah is so angry at Amalek, because it seems that Amalek serves to weaken the Jewish people's strength in the eyes of the rest of the world. You can almost hear like an Israeli talking about how here in the Middle East, this is what you hear all the time. They only know strength. When we appear weak to them, like they take advantage of us, right? How many times do we hear that? It's one of the most commonly used refrains, even by people, trust me, even by people that I would have thought I wouldn't have heard that from. Said like here in this part of the world, the whole, like, we're going to negotiate with them from a place, it looks like weakness. And there's a whole complex relation between strength and the perception of strength and what it yields versus the perception, like how various diplomacies and actions are perceived. And there are people who think that actually various things that we've done embolden people to think, oh, we can attack them, right? And so there are a lot of people who are worried and I think rightfully so, that what happened on October 7th is it is perceived throughout, like for sure Hamas thinks that they won, no matter what we do, no matter what happens in Gaza. Hamas, according to we spoke to so many people, like it's a victory. Literally, it's like it's a victory. Like, look what we did. We drove all the way. Like we occupied the occupiers. We made our way. We were in their towns. We were in like we terrified them. And so that was a refrain that we heard over and over again. And we spoke to people left, right, middle, center. It was a refrain. Hamas won. In the eyes of the Arab world, or at least in the eyes of terrorists, this was a victory, a huge victory. Because the price that they paid in return is nothing. Like they were willing to pay that price. So let's look at number 6, because this is an eerie echo of that theme. Lizkor masha asar lanu Amalek. Shenitztavinu, do you see where we are? Source 6. Shenitztavinu, Lizkor masha asar Amalek Israel. We were commanded to remember what Amalek did to Israel. Sheitchil itgarot bam b'tzeitam Mitzrayim, that they began to harass them when they left Egypt. B'terem nasa goy u'mamlacha yado alehem, before any other nation or kingdom raised their hand against them, right? Uchinyan shekatuv reishis goyim Amalek, as it said in the book of Numbers, Amalek is the first of nations, right? The Targumo and its Aramaic translation, Unkos, is Reish Kravaya Yisrael Hava Amalek, right? The first battle of Israel was Amalek, because everyone else was afraid when they heard of God's great hand that God had used for them in Egypt. But the Amalekites, due to their evil hearts and evil disposition, did not turn their hearts to all of this and harassed them by waging war. And as a result of this, Amalek was able to remove the great fear from the hearts of the other nations. And it is like the matter that our rabbis of blessed memory analogized it to, the analogy of a large boiling pot that no person could enter. Then one individual comes and jumps and enters it, and even though that person is burnt, he cools it off for others. And about the memory of their matter, it is stated, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Now you see here a brilliant, or I think it's brilliant, but it's clearly homiletic and midrashic. Remember the word korcha that I talked about at the beginning? That they happened upon you, they surprised you. That it also has the word in it, right, from the mikra, from it, they surprised you. But also could be that they cooled you off. Now, they also cooled you off means that they cooled you off from your faith. But here he's playing with it, they cooled everyone off, meaning when they jumped in and fought with you, even though they were burned, they lost. From that point on, everybody else said, oh, they're not so great. We can attack them too. Now this becomes like you can readily see the military strategy that would emerge from this midrash, right? That there's a kind of a perception of impenetrability that was lost on October 7th, that was lost on 1973, of course, right? That was whatever was 1967, 1973 in Israel was was a catastrophe, right? 1973 was a catastrophe. And it had very much to do with the arrogance that was present in Israel from 1967 until 1973. We thought, oh, look at what we did in 1967. We were about to enter Cairo, and here we are, and we lost that sense of readiness. And there are many people in Israel who are now talking this way, right? We're talking exactly like this this teaching from Sefer Chinuch, meaning not that they're Amalek. I want to again make clear that we're going to get there. There's certainly people who think that Hamas is Amalek. There's no doubt about that. But I'm going to get to something in a moment that might surprise you. But this notion that Amalek were the ones who jumped in, and that the reason why the Torah is so adamant to never forget them, right? Why, like never forget them, is because they not only because they attacked you when you were weak, but they weakened the perception of your strength in the eyes of others that led to future pain and future wars. Like, so it wasn't just what Amalek did, but what Amalek opened, right, vis-a-vis others. That is so like a part of the tradition. Now, go back for a second. I want to talk about like for a moment. I want to talk about the origins of Amalek. I'm going to take a question or two, then let's look at the origins of Amalek. and then we'll go back to who is Amalek in our life right now, and then how else Amalek has been understood in the tradition. Go ahead, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to add that I think one of the things that we learned from this is not just to rely on God, but that we have to rely on each other. And I say that because there never should have been stragglers in the first place. There should have been stronger individuals accompanying the weak. The Amalek should never have had a chance to pick off people from the rear.
Yeah.
And that was a failure on the part of the people as we left Egypt, is that we let there be stragglers. We should never let there be stragglers. Deberti.
Shamati. And it's so great that you said that, because even though Israel now is extremely united, I just say this, I'm just bringing back information from where we were. And you can find videos of protests and things like that. The vast majority, 98% of Israel, Jews, Israeli Arabs, Bedouins, we met with the full sector, are completely supportive of what's happening now in Israel. And yet, video just emerged yesterday that I'm sure is not unique, and we'll see many more of them at a tekes, at a ceremony for a fallen Titzpanit, is one of the women who were the surveillance, right? To the ones who were doing reconnaissance and surveillance down in the south. They were on an army base there, and that army base was overrun by Hamas, and it was burned to the ground. And they thought she'd been taken hostage, but then it turned out that she was burned, alive. And at a tekes, at a ceremony yesterday, a solemn ceremony in Israel, solemn ceremonies like this are sacrosanct. Her father, when they introduced the commander of that unit. He was about to say a few words, and the father broke out and started screaming, "Not you! You may not speak. It's your fault. You may not speak. You may not speak. I will not allow you to speak here." There is a sense that the South was completely left on its own. I myself, when we were leaving in a bus from Nova, I swore that I heard in the wind the voices of the murdered saying, "Don't leave us now. Don't leave us. Where were you?" And Israel now is united to destroy Hamas, but it's only frozen in its rage internally towards the shock at how this could have possibly taken place. And I think you're right, Beth, that it's a question that will haunt us for the rest of our lives, and certainly Jewish history, which is, how could it have been that the strongest army, one of the strongest armies in the world, if not the strongest in the Middle East for sure, could have been so lulled into that false sense of security, ignored reconnaissance and other information that it had already from other sources. So trust me, it's coming fast and furious, and this is a good story to remember. Like not just what Amalek did, but how we could have. But what is our role in this too? It's a really important question for sure. So let's talk about the origins of Amalek, which will not surprise many of us here. Kind of fits into many of our theologies. Many of us refuse to believe, and I'm in this camp, that evil is ontological, that it is like a structure of being. And we just like, it's a fundamentally anathema to the liberal worldview that asserts that when you're born an innocent person, that you have somewhat of a tabula rasa, genetics and all those other things, taken for granted. But people are not born to hate. So that's true of, Amalek too. Like that's our fundamental belief. Like even the Torah seems to say Amalek from now on is a genetic predisposition, right? Let's, wherever there's Amalek, destroy them. They're kind of predisposed. We find that morally problematic. And we're more likely to believe this, which is if you look at the source number 7, Source 7 on page 6. Just go by the sources. Chapter 6, there's 7. And it's on the 6th page. So it says the origins of Amalek. This is a shocking Gemara. Look at this Gemara. Timna Baya Igure. Who is Timna? So Timna was a royal woman, right, in the lineage of Ishmael. And she came before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to convert. Now, this is nowhere in the Torah. Don't go looking Genesis for this story. Timna is in Genesis, but this is the rabbinic story, which is an amazing thing because the rabbis didn't have to say this. Like almost all midrashim, why did the rabbis have to say this? Like, what do they gain from this? It's like, what did like the rabbis? It's not exactly a very, it's a problematic midrash. She came before Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they rejected her. And she went and became a concubine of Eliphaz, the son of Esau, and said, referring to herself, it is preferable that she will be a maidservant for this nation, and she will not be a noblewoman for another nation. Ultimately, Amalek, the son of Eliphaz, emerged from her. Amalek is the son of the rejected convert. What is the reason that the Jewish people were punished by the suffering at the hand of Amalek? It is due to the fact that they should not have rejected her when she came from afar. No, when she came, I don't know what the rest of it was.
When she sought to convert.
When she sought to convert. Okay. Now, it's just like, what? Right? That's why. So there you go. Like, so again, it's like, talk about blame the victim. Like we blame ourselves. Is this courageous of the rabbis? Is it fawning? Is it just trying somehow to explain the inexplicable? Why do they hate us? Like you have echoes of this in the theories of anti-Semitism that say the reason why Jews are hated is for this reason, fill in the blank. Because they control the banks, because they don't control the banks, because they're communists, or because they're capitalists, because they're strong, because they're weak. Israel is hated because it's oppressive. It's also hated because it took 1948. The United Nations gave us the land, but the United Nations also is telling us that they're occupied territory. So which one do you listen to? You listen to them where it's convenient, right? So when you say that the occupied territories are illegal, then you trust the United Nations. When you say the United Nations gave us the land in 1948, we ignore that. They don't have the right to give you that, but they have the right to. So like we're like in this, like Jews are like in this tailspin. So anti-Semitism is because we push somebody away. It must be our fault that they attacked us. Surely, right? Because we rejected Timnah, therefore we deserve to have the stragglers murdered at the back of the camp. That's like, okay, that's the rabbinic gloss. Okay, how many people like that? How many people like that? Just like, it's okay to say, I kind of like it. There's a part of me that likes it. I like to have neat cause and effect things. Why do you like that?
I think it's human psychology.
It's human psychology, yeah.
That not the part necessarily about blaming ourselves as the victim, the part about the complexity of it all, the paradoxical nature of it all. That
Right.
there are reasons why people hate people other than the fact that they hate them for an actual reason.
Right.
Like you hate
So hate
somebody
is something
because you also love them. Like you hate your brother more than you hate this person you don't know because you also love your brother. That's
Right.
the whole Bereshit is all about those kinds of paradoxical, complex relationships.
Well, let's just look at this source so we can go as people talking, and we'll come back to Paul. Look at source number 11, which we looked at this last year, but I wanted to show it to you again. This is from Rabbi Ethan Tucker, a genius, and the Rosh Yeshiva at Hadar, Machon Hadar. His father was Rabbi Gordon Tucker. Ethan is. If you can touch on any of Ethan's Torah anywhere, you're in good place. Facing Amalek, facing ourselves. He wrote this last year. The shadowy connection between Ephraim and Amalek runs deeper. Ephraim is Yitzchak's great-grandson to the line of Jacob, right? Ephraim is the great-grandson of Yitzchak. Amalek is also Yitzchak's great-grandson through the line of Esau. You see that? Mm-hmm. Talk about brothers. So Yitzchak, right? Yitzchak has two children, Jacob and Esau. So Yitzchak is the grandfather for the children of Esau and the children of Yaakov and Jacob. So the children of Ephraim is the son of Joseph, which is the grandson of Jacob. Right? Joseph has two kids, Menashe and Ephraim. Ephraim is the great grandson of Isaac. And guess what? Amalek is the great grandson of Isaac. We share a great grandfather. Perhaps this is the sense. Therefore, Amalek is also a direct descendant of whom? Avraham. Perhaps this is the sense of the tantalizing statement, Ein zaro shel Amalek nofel ela biyado b'idei bena shel Rachel. Only a child of Rachel can defeat Amalek's line. Yoshua, Shaul, Mordechai, and others must confront Amalek. All of this begins because Mordechai is from the tribe of Ephraim, of Benjamin. But Benjamin is the child of Rachel. So Joshua, Shaul, Mordechai, and others must confront Amalek because Amalek is their mirror image, and only a person himself can slay his own shadow.
Wow.
Amalek is closer to us than we like to think. Amalek is the path not taken, Israel's doppelganger in history, reflecting what might have been and what is still always possible if we lose our way. The holy war against Amalek is thus always also one against our own failings. The recognition that our own missteps can ultimately come back to haunt and debilitate us. Amalek is thus not only significant as a historical people, but perhaps more prominently as a specter of what Jews and Judaism can become if they stray from the correct path. Now, I am so nervous about saying what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But I just want to say that the 9 months that preceded this horrific moment, and I am not saying that I'm not removing agency from a terrorist organization whose vowed, expressed intent is to murder Jews everywhere, not just in the occupied land of Israel, but everywhere they find a Jew, they feel that they're part of Islamic jihadism. They are not Fatah. They are terrorists. I thought until October 8th that everybody can make that distinction, but clearly they can't here in the West. But in our minds, Hamas is responsible for what took place on October 7th. In my mind, they're also responsible for everything else that's taken place. But that being said, everything that took place until October 7th, like in the 9 months that preceded it, was an internal war in Israel for what the character of the state was going to look like. We were fighting with our own shadow, with our own extremism, with our own tendency towards fascism, with our own all of that was on display for the world, right? It was embarrassing. Like to have Smotrich and Ben Gvir, two racists, like in Israel's what? We're the country that has Palestinian Arabs as Knesset members, and we say, wow, we're proud of that. That's right, we're proud of that. Mansour Abbas, proud of that. To have people who, part of the fringe. So it's amazing to read what Ethan's saying. It's also amazing in light of what you're saying, in terms of it's much more comforting to us to imagine there are some antecedent causes to hatred, that it doesn't kind of just right. What's interesting though is what you don't see here is are a number of other causes that could be equally relevant, like jealousy. It's interesting that they don't say that Amalek is just jealous because we were chosen and they weren't, or that the reason they blame a rejection by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on what happened to Timnah, that she then married Eliphaz, right? They don't blame it on something internal to the culture and the mindset of the enemy, which is also would be equally valid, right?
I think one way to interpret what Ethan Tucker is saying is that actually Palestinians are our shadow today.
Right.
Not only are we our own shadow and we're wrestling with our own shadow over the last year and plus, but we're wrestling with them because they represent something to us. They're our cousins, they're our brothers, they're our sisters. We're not treating each other as that. Or maybe we are.
No.
We're fighting with each other because we're so close.
Dysfunctional family.
But
Okay, yeah, that could very well be. I would say that we have our own internal issues. They have their internal issues, and they have bigger internal issues, in many ways. And but anyway, we're obviously we're interwoven. Like the notion that we could separate ourselves from them is really is an illusion. Okay, Paul.
As I read the story, it's unavoidable to me to hear the voice of Mel Brooks or Monty Python and what they could do to this image of Joshua and her holding Moses's arms up. Joshua has to sneeze, her has to go to the bathroom,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden
the whole world is
the
hanging in the
whole
balance. Yeah.
world is hanging in the balance. And I think personally, it's important with these stories to always hold close a sense of the absurd, which at the heart of it is randomness. The universe isn't fair. The universe, things happen. Israel is in a very bad neighborhood. Bad things happen in bad neighborhoods. And assigning causes and solutions to specific causes is often a fool's errand. That without a sense of humor, which is, in my opinion, an appreciation of the randomness of the universe, it's difficult to survive. And it might be that the point of the story, which has, in my mind, a strong comedic element to it. It's Shakespeare, it's Falstaff. And that's why it's there, is to teach us that things happen. And they may have meaning, but they may not. And that possibility of lack of meaning should not be forgotten.
I agree with you 1,000% that this does have, especially if you tie it to Purim, like Purim has that obviously the satirical, almost burlesque quality it seems topsy-turvy and things could go one way, but they go another way. And one way to read it is, of course, that there's a hair's breadth between history, but God is there is great order, and God is moving things, manipulating things, and changing things. Another way to read it would be in the direct opposite way, which is there is no rhyme or reason, but like nonetheless we go forward, right? Like as you said, and almost it's laughable if it weren't so serious. But I think that leaves us and it leaves the Jewish people in a conundrum because if anti-Semitism or anti-Jew hatred, or at least in this context, is there's no rhyme or reason, it just happens, haphazardly. How do you build a strategic, like how do you create structures to make sure that doesn't happen again, that themselves are not like scattershot and completely, buckshot. You just like throw stuff out because you don't know what's going to work. And it's anathema to the kind of the scientific method and the kind of way that Jews in Israel have built a world structured on ingenuity, innovation, and a desire to actually get to the right causes to bring about and produce the right effects. So it's very problematic on the one hand, to try to search for reasons when there are none. But if there are none, then what are we left with? Like I think that gaping chaos is really, there's no way to really run a country based upon, well, we have no idea why this happened, and let's just go forward laughing all our way to building stronger walls. Because then, I mean, I want to hold what you're saying because I think that there's something profoundly true about what you're saying and deep, but I'm not altogether sure where it leaves us. But I just want to hold that because I think you're saying something.
If I could just say one thing.
No, Tony, because you
Okay.
just walked in and
Okay.
I really got to go.
Got it.
So I want to go.
Just one last thing. What you just said is the foundation of Jewish humor.
What I say?
What you just said
Okay.
is that's what Jewish comics have worked with.
Right, the absurdity.
And
right.
One of the greatest strengths of
right.
the Jewish people is their comedians.
Right, but here's the thing. Right, that's true. That's absolutely true. But like, it actually runs counter to what Jen is saying because it's saying that it actually creates in a profound way the two universes that are spun from the both of your perspectives are completely antithetical. One is a Jew who can actually hope that one day they will live in peace, that anti-Semitism will one day be eradicated because we assume that there is a causal relation between why people hate us and what we can do to make them stop hating us. And the minute we move from that universe to your universe, Paul, there are plenty of people who have your perspective. We actually run into what Peter Beinart in this morning's in yesterday's New York Times or last New York Times, a 15-minute read if you want to read it. It's been a long time coming. I don't like what Peter says, even though I respect him as a human being. I fundamentally don't like his approach to any of this conflict, and I've said it to him, and I'll continue to say it to him. I think he's hopelessly naive at the cost of actual Jewish bodies. But nonetheless, he says that there is an inherent contradiction between liberalism and, to some extent, Zionism. And Zionism is rooted in the notion that this is the Zionist perspective. Zionism, whether you think it's inherently problematic or it is, historical Zionism says this: Jews tried to live amongst the non-Jews for 2,000 years, and it didn't work. We thought we would one day be safe on the Upper West Side, in Paris, in London, in Utah, wherever we went, in Mexico City, we would be safe because we championed liberal values. We became a part of the Western civilizational model, and we became artists and politicians. We did what we were supposed to do, and nonetheless, the Shoah. And where Herzl saw this before the Shoah, but Herzl's approach was: listen, if we're in our homeland, it's true we might not be safer there, but it certainly will know who our enemies are. And there's no rhyme or reason to Jewish history and the reasons they hate us. There's no reason. We tried every which way. We wore Asap's clothing, and we did everything. But in your worldview, which is the worldview of many people now, trying to understand, no, there are reasons why Jews are hated, the reasons why Israel is hated, and so on, and go into all of these rationales. And yours is a deeply hopeful perspective. You call you a historical positivist, and you, like me, are depressive. And by that I mean in the Freudian sense. It's like you're depressive. I know it's because you're a Capricorn, but whatever. It's because we just fundamentally don't believe that there is a rhyme or reason, that the rabbis saying that Timnah was rejected. It's just all continued fawning. They hate us.
David, here's a commonality between the two
Yeah.
approaches, which is they're both agentic, in the sense that if you blame yourself,
Yeah.
you have agency to fix it. Which
Right.
is what you're saying about my position here. In Paul's position, or the traditional Zionist position, you are also agentic. You're saying we are not going to fix. We're not going to fix that people hate us.
Right. There's
but
certainly
we're going to fix that. We're going to live. We're going to figure out our way.
Right,
to live.
but what we Jews did agentically throughout the years was because we had no power and no sovereignty and no army. We just assumed that we would go on living our lives, hoping that God, as the supreme divine being that God is, would make sure that at least a couple of us were left over by the end. But there was nothing we could do to stop their hatred returning into their persecution and their violence against us. We went on and built culture. We went on, in spite of everything, to build a robust culture that is the envy of the world. But it wasn't until we actually had sovereignty in the state of Israel and we had an IDF that we could actually do something about their hatred and say it's enough with beating the crap out of us. Enough's enough.
And release the hatred.
And not release the hatred. That's baloney. Okay, anyway, back to the okay, let's go. So let's look at who Amalek is and isn't anymore. Source number 5. No Amalek but Amalek. Now this is written by Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim, the second Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. Yeah, are you with me? Source number 5 is on page 4. Page 4, source 5. No Amalek but Amalek. Now, some have understood, look at my introduction here. You see my introduction? Yeah. Some have understood the commandment to wipe out Amalek to extend to other actors with genocidal intent against the Jewish people. Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim, the second Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, clarifies that this commandment cannot be extended to any other nation, even to those who perpetrated the horrors of the Holocaust. The law of Amalek is fixed in the verse, "You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from beneath the sky. Do not forget." And in other verses. The Torah isolated this commandment to Amalek, so it is not within our power to include another nation in this commandment, even though they have done more evil than it. It is true that I have seen it brought down in the name of the Gaon, Chaim Soloveitchik, great rabbis from the Soloveitchik lineage. May his memory be blessed. That the commandment of blotting out Amalek is not specifically about the nation of Amalek, but rather any foreign nation that acts like Amalek has this commandment applied to it. However, I have found neither root nor branch to his words, meaning it's unfounded. Perhaps he gave this explanation of his about the commandment that is written in the Torah. So according to his approach, this would not be within the category of adding a commandment to the commandments of the Torah. In other words, he's trying to say here that he didn't add a commandment by saying, not just Amalek. He thinks it's within the mitzvah of destroying Amalek is also anyone who acts like Amalek. However, behold, the Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvot, Maimonides writes, was exacting to distinguish the seed of Amalek only from the rest of the seed of Esav, and likewise was the author of the Sefer Chinuch exacting, since he wrote that only if one finds someone from their seed, like the focus on the seed seems to be saying that it's something in Amalek itself, not Amalek-like behavior. It's them itself, genetic, right? Only then is the obligation incumbent upon them to kill him and destroy him in any place and at any time, right? So this is, right, anybody that wants to say Amalek is, the Muslims or the Arabs or Hamas, right? We have, first of all, the problem is that they're not Amalek, according to Rabbi Yisrael Nisim, who is writing this for the sake of those who are saying that about the Palestinians. Who is talking about the Palestinians here, right? He's also talking about the Germans, right? People calling Nazis Amalek and so on. So, but not only that, it's not only that. He was also saying that that we also don't know who Amalek is anyway. In other words, there's already a tradition which I should have brought here as a source, that when the rabbis in the Talmud already in the first millennium were trying to say who is Amalek, they say that once Sancher of one of the kings who came in and mixed all the peoples and all the refugees were mixed together, we have no way to know who is an Amalekite anymore, right? So the rabbis already are trying to diminish our ability to identify a particular Amalekite. In other words, in some level, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek is already, and to blot them out, or they've already been blotted out. Right? What's left over are people who act like Amalek did, right? So we can't destroy them vis-a-vis Amalek. It's almost like the rabbis undid that mitzvah. They did it by saying historically we don't know who Amalek is, but they also did it because it's a moral problem. Like the Torah tells us to kill men, women, and children from Amalek. So the rabbis did as they classically do, is they don't say that God is immoral. They just say that there's no longer there doesn't exist any situation any longer where we can actually find an Amalekite. So that's been a known fact for 1,500 years. There isn't any serious Jew that I know of who thinks, right, that the mitzvah of Amalek applies now to Palestinians or to Muslims to such extent that they would kill men, women, and children. It doesn't exist. That's why it was farcical and absurd when people like Netanyahu said they're Amalek. He didn't mean that the IDF was going to go in and kill men, women, and children. It's so absurd and ridiculous that anybody who knows anything about the IDF and about how it works and about the people who are running it, it's beyond. He wasn't going to go and do to them what they did in the South. It was just, he was saying they acted like the arch enemy of the Jewish people, who preyed upon the weak ones, right? It's already been metaphorized and allegorized. It was ridiculous. And it was just an opportunity for people to grab upon it to try to say that, see, we have an extremist government in Israel and we have an extremist government in Gaza, which is to no end. It bothers me that we, especially liberal Jews, use univocal language to describe Netanyahu's extremism and the extremism of Hamas. They're not in the same universe of discourse. Although I said that before, we have extremists, but we have to find different language. We have elements within the government that are pushing us towards the kind of liberal democracy that we should expect from our country. It's not remotely like Hamas, God forbid. Anyway, I also think that the rabbis didn't want to give up on the potential within even the most ardent hater to one day be reformed. If you look at source number 10, we also know the remarkable teachings from the rabbis who, they undo themselves with how subversive they can be of even their own, Mi b'nei banav shel Haman lamdu Torah b'nei Brak. The sons of Haman, the descendants of Haman, studied Torah in Bnei Brak.
Yes.
Mi b'nei banav shel Sisra. Who is Sisra? Sisera is the arch enemy of the Jewish people, whose mother was crying, right, when he didn't come home from attacking in the time of Deborah, the judge. And Sisera was like, the hater of the Jewish people. He came and fought them and murdered and blah, blah, blah. Right? The children of Sisera, Lamdu Tinokot B'Yerushalayim, they had nursery schools in Jerusalem. Mibnei banav shel Sancheriv Lamdu Torah B'Rabim. There are even children of Sancheriv, who was an enemy general, who publicly taught Torah in public. Who are they? Shmalya Avtalion, these two great rabbis. And we have none other than the great Berdichever Rebbe, whose teaching we teach every year about the inner Amalek. If you look at source, where is it?
12.
Source number 12, our favorite source, inner Hamans, like I talked about in my sermon last night, that it's true that we have inner Hamans. It's true, or inner Amalek. So this is from the Berdichever. It says, "Achor asher asalecha," right? He quotes the verse in Deuteronomy. Remember, it seems that it's not only for this that the seed of Israel is being commanded regarding the erasing of Amalek, which is from the seed of Esav. Rather, every person in Israel needs to erase the evil part that is concealed in one's heart, that is known by the name Amalek. We have an inner Amalek. This is because whenever the seed of Amalek is found in the world, it is found in the human being. Since human is a small world, we're a microcosm, and therefore there is a reality to Amalek, to the force of evil inside every human being, which arises every time to make a human being sin. And it's regarding this that the remembrance comes in the Torah. Right? So that's amazing. So, like he says, listen, we don't have a remembrance of Amalek any longer in the deeper sense. We don't know who Amalek is. We only know that there are people who act like Amalek, but they're not actually Amalek. And just there are people who act like Amalek, including us. Right? We act not exactly like Amalek, but we have that part of us, and he says that is also drawn to those things. Behold, the strength of the seed of Israel is only found in the mouth. So it says the voice of Jacob. So we have to learn Torah. When a person has this force always burning within towards the Holy One of blessing, then no evil can control them. When a person allows this force to rest, then immediately they come under the verse of they left Refidim, meaning their hands became weak, Rafa, and instantly an Amalek came. Instantly evil takes over. I can go on and on, but this is from the Berdichever. That's another approach.
It's interesting the hands become weak because we started with holding up Moses' hands.
Exactly.
It seems so important. That part is also about holding up the community, that we need each other to hold one another up.
Which is why last night when I gave my sermon, I talked about the role that we Jews here in America have for those who are fighting. And the image of Moses going up to the mountaintop to fight Amalek, and the image of young men and women who are conscripted into Israel's army. And the vast majority of whom, like we thought before the war, that you could divide Israel into all of these different, sects and different tribes and different groups ideologically and religiously. But what happened on October 7th is that everybody put all of that aside and came to fight. Men, women, children, I call them children, young men and women, 18 years old, up to, men and women who had been out of the army for years. And they came 300% conscription. They thought they'd get 150%. They had 300% of all the reservists who came. And the great next battle, Dr. Micha Goodman has written about this. He said that from 1948 until 1967, there was like the great argument in Israeli society was on the kind of government that was going to be governing Israel. Was it going to be, liberal democracy? Was it going to be socialist, communist? What was going to be the type of government in Israel? And by 1967, it was already decided. And then arrived 1967, and after the war in 1967, he said when Israel reclaimed the old city and East Jerusalem and other parts in the Golan and Gaza and Sinai. So we basically, the next conversation became, how big should Israel be? Not how it should be governed, but how big it should be. And what are we willing to do for peace? Would we give away various parts, and what were our strategic, like that was the main argument until Oslo and beyond, and still up until today. And he said that the next great argument amongst Israeli society is who's serving. Obviously, as you know, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, are not serving. And what became very clear in right now in this current war is that Israel needs people. They need people on the front lines. And that there was a long time where the Israeli army thought that it would be, the Israeli army could be small and strategic. But now we realize that that was a bad idea. We actually need real people on the ground, right? Watching over the weak and watching over the southern border and the northern border and all of the other borders. So I think that also applies to us here in America. I think that the liberal front here in America is the most dangerous. What's happening in the Democratic Party is the most dangerous challenge to Israel's security that we've seen in decades. Right? It's even more dangerous in some level than what happened in the South. Right? The specter that I get emails now from If Not Now and other organizations, liberal Jews, who are going to go fight against AIPAC, right? Fighting against AIPAC, which is a really brilliant idea. Pretty soon it's the American Israel Action Committee. It's a powerful lobby. It's in Washington. The immediate impact of the splitting of the Democratic Party between which is happening as we speak, is that first of all it forces all of us who are in my mind centrists or people who are to the left of center like me to actually begin to really think about, maybe we will vote for Republicans even against our interests, right? No, if I have to vote to make sure that my sister in Tel Aviv doesn't have a missile land on her, which is a very real possibility if we don't have Iron Dome in Israel. If we don't have an Iron Dome shooting down the thousands of missiles that are being sent from the south towards parts of Israel, like Jews in America are going to have to make a decision about where we are, and to think that we're going to exert pressure on the Israeli government to not do what it thinks is in the best interest of its own citizens from America is just, first of all, it's fundamentally flawed.